The storm had been building all evening. Rain streaked down the tall glass windows of the restaurant, blurring the city lights outside into long, trembling lines of gold. Inside, everything was warm, too warm. Soft jazz floated through the room. Crystal glasses clinked. Cutlery whispered against porcelain. The kind of place where the air itself felt expensive. The Obsidian didn't advertise. It didn't need to. If you were meant to be here, you already knew. Guests sat in tailored suits and silk dresses, coats handed off without a word, voices low and confident. This wasn't a place for first impressions. It was a place for assumptions. Then the door opened. At first, no one reacted. Not right away. The rain rushed in, sharp and cold, followed by the smell of wet pavement and old leather. A draft rolled across the marble floor. And then people looked. The man who stepped inside didn't belong, not by any visible rule. His coat was heavy and worn, darkened by rain and time. Mud clung to the cuffs of his trousers. His boots had seen years, not weeks. Gray hair clung to his head in uneven waves, damp from the storm. He paused just inside the doorway, as if giving the room time to settle. It didn't. A couple at the nearest table exchanged a glance. A woman near the bar frowned, then leaned closer to her companion. Somewhere toward the back, a soft laugh slipped out, quick, sharp, and unkind. The host froze behind the podium. "Sir," he said, blinking, "can I help you?" The man looked around slowly. Not confused. Not intimidated. Just observant. His eyes moved from the chandeliers to the tables, to the people watching him pretend not to watch. "Yes," the man said calmly. "I'd like a table." The host hesitated. His smile tightened, stretched thin by calculation. "I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight," he replied, a little too quickly. That was a lie. Several tables were still open. Everyone could see them. The man nodded once, as if he'd expected that answer. "I don't mind waiting." Behind the podium, the host glanced toward the manager's office. That's when the whispers grew louder. "Is he serious? Does he know where he is? Someone should call security." At a corner table near the window, a young waitress paused mid-step, a tray balanced on her palm. Her name was Rachel. She'd been moving all night, table to table, smile to smile, without stopping long enough to breathe. But now she stopped. She watched the man standing alone by the door, rainwater pooling beneath his boots. He didn't shrink under the stares. He didn't apologize for existing. He simply waited. Something about that made her uneasy. Not uncomfortable. Uneasy. The manager emerged moments later, straightening his jacket as he walked. Rick Garrison. Sharp haircut. Sharper smile. The kind that showed teeth but no warmth. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, loudly enough for half the room to hear. The host gestured toward the man. "He's asking for a table." Rick's eyes traveled over the man, slow and deliberate. "The coat. The boots. The mud." "Oh," Rick said, exhaling through his nose. "I see." He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound polite while remaining very public. "Sir, this is a private establishment," Rick said. "Our guests expect a certain atmosphere." The man met his gaze. "I understand." Rick smiled wider. "I'm sure you do. Unfortunately, we can't accommodate everyone who walks in off the street." A few guests chuckled softly. The man didn't respond right away. He reached into his coat pocket, not hurried, not defensive. Several heads turned sharply. But he didn't pull out a wallet. Or a card. He removed his hand and folded it calmly in front of him. "Then I'll wait outside," he said. "Unless that's also a problem." The smile on Rick's face flickered, just for a moment. Rachel felt it then. That strange pull in her chest. The sense that something was happening beneath the surface, something no one else in the room seemed to notice. The man turned slightly as if preparing to leave. And that's when she realized it. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even disappointed. He looked curious. Like a man watching an experiment unfold exactly as expected. What no one realized, not the guests, not the staff, not even the manager, was that this man hadn't come for food. He had come to test something far more valuable. Rachel didn't have time to stop thinking. That was the problem. Thinking cost energy, and energy was something she ran out of halfway through every shift. Her feet ached in a dull, constant way, the kind of pain that didn't scream anymore, just lingered. 12 hours on marble floors would do that. She adjusted her grip on the tray, shoulders tight, posture straight, smile ready. Always ready. The guests didn't notice. They rarely did. To them, she was movement. A figure passing between tables. A voice that said, "Of course," and "right away," and "my pleasure," even when it wasn't. Her name tag read Rachel, but no one used it. Behind the calm expression was a countdown she carried everywhere. Rent was due in 9 days. Her father's medication was already 3 days late, stretched carefully, pill by pill, the way doctors tell you not to, but desperation makes its own rules. His voice had been weaker on the phone that morning. He tried to joke about it. She'd laughed, then cried in the staff bathroom afterward, counting the cracks in the wall so she wouldn't break. There was no margin for mistakes. No room for kindness that cost something. Rick knew that. The manager always knew exactly how much pressure to apply. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He used schedules instead. Glances. Silence. The threat of lost hours hung heavier than any shout. "You're replaceable," he liked to say, smiling. "But don't worry. As long as you do your job, you're fine." Rachel did her job better than most. Still, her hands trembled sometimes when she poured wine. Still, she counted tips twice before leaving. Still, she carried the quiet fear that one wrong move, one bad night, would undo everything. That's why she noticed the man. Not because he was poor. Not because he didn't belong. Because he didn't react the way people usually did when they were being humiliated. Rachel had seen every version of embarrassment. The slumped shoulders. The forced laughs. The angry exits. This man had none of it. As she moved past the host's stand, she glanced at him again. His posture was relaxed. Not careless, controlled. His gaze didn't dart or drop. It moved slowly, taking in faces, details, reactions. When Rick spoke to him, the man listened fully, like the words mattered, even though they clearly didn't. And then there were the details. Small things. Easy to miss if you weren't used to watching. The way he waited for Rick to finish speaking before responding. The careful choice of words. The absence of apology. Even his watch, old, understated, worn smooth at the edges, but immaculately maintained. Not cheap. Just not loud. Rachel swallowed. She told herself it didn't matter. People played roles all the time. Appearances lied. She couldn't afford to invent stories about strangers. Still, when Rick turned away, clearly done with the man, something tightened in her chest. Helping him would be a mistake. She knew that instantly. Policy was clear. No exceptions. No sympathy cases. No, just this once. Rick had fired a server last month for seating the wrong guest at the wrong table. No warning. No discussion. Just a quiet dismissal and a final paycheck that barely covered groceries. Rachel needed this job. She needed the tips. The hours. The health insurance that barely counted as insurance but was better than nothing. She needed to survive. And yet, she watched as the man turned toward the door, rain still hammering against the glass outside. His coat hung heavy on his shoulders. He moved slowly, deliberately, like time wasn't chasing him the way it chased everyone else. Something inside her resisted. Not heroism. Not bravery. Recognition. She knew what it felt like to be reduced to what people assumed you were worth. To be judged before you spoke. To have your value calculated by strangers who'd never asked your name. Helping him might cost her everything. But ignoring him would cost her something worse. Rachel inhaled, steadying herself, and made a decision she couldn't undo. She stepped away from her section. As she passed Rick, he didn't notice. He was laughing with a table near the bar, already done with the problem he thought he'd solved. Rachel reached the man just as he placed his hand on the door. "Sir," she said quietly. Turned. Up close, his eyes were sharp and clear. Not young. Not tired. Just aware. "There's a table in the back," she continued, lowering her voice. It's not usually used during service. If you don't mind something small. The man studied her for a moment. Not her uniform. Not her badge. Her face. That would be kind of you, he said gently. Rachel nodded. This way. As she led him past the watching guests, past the murmurs and half-hidden smiles, she felt the weight of her choice settle in. She had crossed a line. And she had no idea how high the price would be. Rick didn't notice Rachel seating the man at first. He was too busy performing. That's what Rick loved most, the audience. The way his voice carried just far enough for nearby tables to hear. The way laughter followed him, not because he was funny, but because people with money liked laughing at the same targets. When he finally saw the man sitting at the back table, his smile tightened. He walked over slowly, deliberately, hands clasped behind his back like a host welcoming royalty. Except there was no welcome in his eyes. I thought I made myself clear, Rick said, his voice calm but sharp. This section is for paying guests. The man looked up, unbothered. I intend to pay for what I order. Rick let out a soft laugh. Not amused, performative. Several heads turned. Well, Rick replied, glancing around the room, this isn't a shelter. And it's not a cafe. It's a private dining establishment. A woman at a nearby table smirked. Her companion leaned back, arms crossed, already entertained. Rachel stood frozen a few steps away, tray in hand. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The man nodded once. I understand where I am. Rick tilted his head. Do you? He picked up a menu, flipped it open, then closed it again without looking. Because everything here costs more than you think. And I wouldn't want you embarrassed. That word landed exactly where Rick intended. A few guests chuckled. Someone whispered something behind a napkin. The man didn't react. He simply folded his hands on the table and said, I didn't ask for anything free. That should have ended it. But humiliation, once it starts, rarely stops on its own. Rick straightened, sensing momentum. Tell you what, he said brightly. Why don't you let me save you some trouble? There's a diner 2 blocks down. Very affordable. Very forgiving. More laughter now. Louder. Rick glanced over his shoulder, soaking it in, then looked back at the man. No hard feelings, right? Rachel felt her stomach drop. She watched the man carefully, expecting anger. Shame. Something. Instead, he smiled. Just slightly. None at all, he said. That confused Rick. Confusion annoyed him. Rick leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound reasonable. I'm trying to help you. People like you don't usually enjoy places like this. It can be uncomfortable. The man's eyes flicked briefly around the room. You seem very confident about what people like me enjoy. Rick's smile hardened. Experience. That did it. Rick straightened and raised his voice again. I'll need you to leave now, sir. The word sir dripped with mockery. The room had fully turned. Forks paused midair. Conversations slowed. Everyone knew what this was now. A show. Rachel saw Rick's reflection in the mirror behind the bar, pleased, powerful, certain. She also saw herself standing there, silent, trapped between doing nothing and doing something she couldn't afford. The man didn't stand. He didn't argue. He looked at Rick calmly and said, May I finish my tea first? Rick laughed out loud. Tea, he repeated like it was a joke. We don't serve tea to people who can't afford the table they're sitting at. Someone clapped once. Then stopped, embarrassed, but the damage was done. The man turned his head slightly, meeting Rachel's eyes. Not pleading. Not accusing. Just steady. Rick followed his gaze and snapped, Don't look at her. She doesn't make decisions here. Rachel flinched. Rick turned back to the man. Last chance. Get up, or I'll have security escort you out. The man considered this. Then nodded. Very well, he said softly. Rick exhaled, victorious. That's when the man added, But before I go, may I ask you something? Rick sighed dramatically. Make it quick. The man gestured gently around the room. Do you enjoy this? Rick blinked. Enjoy what? Being watched, the man replied. Being believed. A ripple moved through the nearby tables. Rick frowned. I don't know what game you think you're playing. No game, the man said calmly. Just an observation. Rick's patience snapped. Enough. You're done here. He turned, already signaling security. Behind him, the man spoke one last time. You might want to be careful, he said quietly. Crowds can be unforgiving when they realize they've been cheering the wrong person. Rick scoffed and walked away. But a few guests exchanged glances. Rachel felt it then, a shift. Subtle but real. The humiliation had gone far enough. And when humiliation fails, something crueler always follows. The storm raged outside, rain slapping against the tall glass windows of the obsidian. Inside, the restaurant was a cocoon of warmth and soft golden light. But for the young waitress, Rachel, it felt like a pressure cooker. Every eye in the room was on the old man who had just shuffled in, mud-streaked coat clinging to his frail frame. The whispers, the stifled laughter, it was unbearable. The manager, a man whose power seemed tied to the fear he inspired, stepped forward with a smug grin. Sir, I'm afraid we don't serve all that, he said, his eyes flicking to Rachel, daring her to enforce the rule. Rachel felt the heat rising to her cheeks. She could feel the tension pressing on her chest like a weight. The old man, however, didn't flinch. He simply stood there, calm, unassuming, almost expectant. It was as if he already knew something that no one else did. She glanced at him, noticing details others missed. The careful way he held his hands, the quiet confidence in his eyes, the subtle elegance of the watch peeking from beneath his coat sleeve. Something about him didn't add up. This wasn't just a hungry man seeking a meal. He was here for something else. Something far more important. The manager tapped his finger against the polished counter, his patience thinning. Miss, are you going to make him leave or should I? Rachel's mind raced. Following the rules would be safe. Following her instincts could get her fired. Every fiber of her being screamed to act, but fear gripped her tightly. She thought of her sick mother, her sibling locked away, the debt notices piling up like cruel reminders on her fridge. Risking this job was a luxury she couldn't afford. But then she looked at him again. The old man's eyes weren't pleading, weren't fearful. They were observing, judging even, but not her. The room was watching her, waiting to see what she would do. And for the first time in weeks, Rachel realized something. Her choice didn't have to be about fear. It could be about integrity. Her decision was made in a heartbeat. She stepped forward, her voice firm but quiet. Sir, please follow me. I'll find you a table. Gasps echoed around the room. The guests' whispers turned into muffled chuckles. The manager's face darkened, disbelief and anger flashing across his features. Rachel, you can't. I can, she said softly, almost to herself. I must. Leading him through the maze of tables, Rachel noticed every small detail. The way he avoided the puddle by the doorway, how his coat, though worn, bore no stains where it counted, and the polite nods he offered to the staff along the way. Each movement was precise, deliberate, controlled. It was as if he were mapping the room, understanding it, testing it. Seating him quietly at a corner table, Rachel stepped back, heart hammering in her chest. She knew she'd just violated policy. She knew she'd probably just signed her own dismissal. But a strange calm settled over her, a clarity she hadn't felt in months. The old man looked up at her, eyes softening for the briefest moment. Thank you, he said, voice low but steady. Not a word of pity, not a hint of entitlement, just acknowledgement. Rachel forced a smile and turned back toward the dining room. The manager's gaze followed her, sharp and accusing, while the guests whispered and stared, certain they'd just witnessed a catastrophic breach of etiquette. But Rachel didn't falter. Not this time. As she returned to the counter, the storm outside finally began to ease, rain slowing to a steady drizzle. She realized in that quiet moment that this single act, this choice, had set off a chain reaction she could never stop. And somewhere deep inside she understood, it wasn't about rules or fear. It was about courage, about recognizing the value in someone when everyone else only saw an outsider. And the old man? He didn't just sit there. He watched. Patiently. Quietly. Waiting. Because in a place where most measured worth by wealth, Rachel had just measured it by something far rarer, character. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The man sat quietly at the table Rachel had chosen for him, hands folded, posture relaxed. The room slowly returned to its rhythm, glasses clinking, cutlery tapping, low conversations resuming. To the guests, it felt like the moment had passed. To Rick, it felt like a delay before the punchline. He watched from the bar, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin, satisfied smile. He let Rachel move between tables, let the man sit there untouched. Then, once the tension softened, Rick stepped in. Perfect timing. He walked over with the bill folder already in hand, placing it gently on the table as if offering a gift. "Sir," he said pleasantly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "before we go any further, I just need to confirm payment." The man looked up. "Of course." Rick nodded. "We require a valid card before service begins." The man reached into his coat pocket slowly, then paused. He checked another pocket, then another. Rachel noticed the shift immediately. The smallest change in his breathing. The pause that lingered just a second too long. "I don't seem to have it," the man said calmly. Rick's smile widened. "Oh," he replied. "That's unfortunate." A couple at the next table leaned in, pretending not to listen. "I must have left it at home," the man continued. "If that's an issue, I'll leave." Rick raised a hand. No, don't rush. Let's be clear first." He turned slightly, projecting his voice. "So, to confirm, you're sitting in a private dining room, during peak hours, without the ability to pay." The word pay landed like a gavel. A murmur rippled through the room. Rachel felt her chest tighten. "Rick," she said quietly, "I can?" He didn't look at her. "Rachel, please." Then to the man, "You see the problem." The man nodded once. "I do." Rick exhaled, triumphant. "Then I'm afraid we're done here." He turned to Rachel at last. "And you," he added sharply, "come with me." Her heart dropped. Rick didn't whisper. He didn't pull her aside. He wanted witnesses. "You violated policy," he said coldly. "You embarrassed this establishment." "I was just trying to help," Rachel replied, her voice steady but strained. Rick scoffed. "By seating someone who can't afford to be here?" The man began to speak, but Rick cut him off. "No," Rick snapped. "This isn't your moment." He turned back to Rachel. "You're fired." The word echoed. A few guests nodded to themselves as if this outcome made sense. As if order had been restored. Rachel felt the sting behind her eyes, but she refused to let it spill. She straightened, shoulders back, hands shaking just enough to betray her. "I understand," she said quietly. Rick smirked. "Good." Security appeared near the entrance, already alerted. Rick gestured toward the door. "Sir, I'll need you to leave now." The man stood slowly. He adjusted his coat, smoothed the fabric, and looked around the room one last time. Not in shame. In recognition. "I apologize for the inconvenience," he said, voice even. Rick laughed softly. "Apology accepted." Rachel watched as the guests' eyes followed the man. Some smug, some satisfied, some relieved they'd backed the right side. She felt the weight of their judgment settle on her like dust. She removed her apron and placed it neatly on the counter. For a moment, no one spoke. Rick broke the silence. "Let that be a lesson," he said to the room, smiling. "This is not a place for charity." The guests returned to their meals, reassured. Rachel walked toward the back, her vision blurring. She thought of rent due in 3 days. Of hospital bills. Of how quickly one decision had unraveled everything. Behind her, the door closed. Then, something strange happened. The lights flickered. Twice. Music cut out mid-note. Phones buzzed, then went dark. Conversations faltered. Rick frowned. "What's going on?" No one answered. At the entrance, the man stopped walking. He turned around slowly. Rick scoffed. "Don't tell me you forgot something else." The man met his gaze. "No," he said calmly. "I was just finished pretending." The room stilled. Rick laughed, uneasy now. "Pretending what?" The man smiled. "Being powerless." And in that moment, the false victory collapsed. Quietly, completely. At first, everyone assumed it was a coincidence. A brief flicker of the lights. A momentary glitch. These things happen sometimes, even in places like this. Rick waved a dismissive hand toward the ceiling. Relax, he said loudly. We'll have it fixed in a second. But the music didn't come back. The soft jazz that usually filled the room was replaced by silence so complete it felt intentional. Guests shifted in their chairs. Someone tapped their phone, frowning when the screen stayed black. No signal, a woman whispered to her companion. Rick turned toward the bar. What did you do? He snapped at the bartender. I didn't touch anything, the bartender replied, already checking the terminal. The system's down. Rick scoffed. That's impossible. Behind him, the man still stood near the entrance, hands loosely at his sides, completely at ease. He hadn't moved toward the door. He hadn't raised his voice. He simply waited. Rachel noticed something else. Security hadn't intervened. The two men by the entrance stood frozen, hands near their radios, confused. One tried to speak into it. Nothing. Rick felt it then. That faint tightening in his chest. The kind that came when controls started slipping. He turned back toward the man. What are you still doing here? The man looked around the room slowly, as if taking inventory. Observing, he said. Rick laughed, but it sounded thin. You think this is funny? No, the man replied. I think it's revealing. Rick's jaw clenched. Get out. Now. The man tilted his head slightly. I will. In a moment. Rick took a step toward him. You don't get to decide that. The man met his eyes. You're sure? A guest near the window raised her hand slightly. Excuse me, my payment app just shut down. Another voice followed. Mine too. The bartender cleared his throat. Rick, the reservation system's offline. All of it. Rick spun around. That's not possible. We have backups. The man spoke again calmly. Not the ones you rely on. Rick froze. What did you say? He asked. The man walked a few steps back into the room. Slowly. Deliberately. Each footstep echoed louder than it should have. I said, he repeated, not the ones you rely on. Rachel felt the air shift. It wasn't fear yet. It was confusion turning into unease. Rick tried to regain ground. You think you can scare people with some tech glitch? The man smiled faintly. No. I think people scare themselves when they realize how fragile their certainty is. Rick pointed at him. Now. The man stopped in the center of the room. Before I go, he said, there's something you should know. Rick crossed his arms. Oh, I'm dying to hear this. The man's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I don't carry a card, he said. I don't need one. A few guests scoffed. Rick laughed loudly. Of course you don't. The man continued, unfazed. The last time I used one personally was over a decade ago. Rick rolled his eyes. Security. No one moved. Rick turned, furious. Did you not hear me? One of the guards swallowed. Sir? Our comms are down. Rick felt sweat prick at his temple. The man spoke again. You see, Mr. Richardson? Rick snapped his head around. How do you know my name? The man smiled. Because names matter, especially when they're attached to decisions. Rachel's breath caught. The man continued, your restaurant runs on leased systems. Vendor managed. Remote authorized. Rick opened his mouth, then closed it. And those vendors, the man added gently, answer to people like me. The room went quiet in a different way now. This wasn't spectacle. This was gravity. Rick forced a laugh. You expect us to believe you shut down my restaurant? No, the man said. I expect you to notice that it's already shut down. Rick spun toward the bar again. The bartender was pale. Rick, every terminal just logged out. A guest stood abruptly. I need to leave. So do I, another said. Rick raised his hands. Everyone please. The man lifted a single finger. The room stilled. Rachel felt it then, the power shift. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just undeniable. The man turned slightly toward her. I'm sorry about your job, he said. Rick snapped, "Don't talk to her." The man ignored him. "You did the right thing." Rachel swallowed hard. "I didn't expect." "I know," he said gently. Rick stepped forward again, voice cracking now. "Who are you?" The man finally looked directly at him. "That," he said, "depends on what you choose to do next." Rick opened his mouth. Then the man added, almost casually, "But the next name I say will make this very uncomfortable for you." Rick's face drained of color. And the room waited. Rick's mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time since he'd taken control of the restaurant floor, he didn't know what to say. The confidence he wore so easily moments ago now looked brittle, like a mask cracking under pressure. "Go on," he finally snapped, forcing a laugh. "Say the name. Let's hear it." The man didn't rush. He reached into his coat and pulled out a phone, old, plain, unremarkable. He tapped the screen once. Across the room, the bartender's terminal blinked. Then chimed. "Rick," the bartender said quietly. "Something just logged back in." Rick spun around. "What?" Before the bartender could answer, a sharp notification tone echoed from Rick's own phone. Then another. And another. His smile vanished. He looked down. Color drained from his face. Rachel watched his hands begin to shake. "What is this?" Rick muttered, scrolling. "Who sent this?" The man spoke gently. "Those would be your records." Rick laughed weakly. "I don't know what you think you have." "You skimmed," the man said calmly. "Small amounts. Enough to stay invisible. You rerouted refunds. Pressured staff to void transactions. Took cash when you thought no one was watching." The room leaned in. Rachel's heart pounded. Rick snapped his head up. "That's a lie." The man nodded once. "That's what you told yourself." A woman at the bar whispered, "Is he talking about Rick?" Rick stepped forward, voice rising. "You don't know anything about me." The man turned slightly, addressing the room now. He fired 2 servers last year for performance issues. Both had asked questions about missing tips. Rick shouted, "Shut up." "And the dishwasher who quit suddenly?" the man continued. "He was told to keep quiet about what he saw in the office after closing." Rachel's breath caught. She remembered the dishwasher. Everyone did. Rick's voice cracked. "You can't prove any of this." The man lifted his phone again. "Already did." The pause. Then the bartender spoke again, shaken. "Rick, the system just flagged irregularities. Years' worth." A guest near the window stood. "Is this real?" Rick backed up a step. "This is insane. You're all being manipulated." The man's tone remained calm. "By you." Security finally moved, just one step, but not toward the man. Toward Rick. "Sir," one guard said carefully, "we need to ask you to step aside." Rick stared at him. "You answer to me." The guard swallowed. "Not tonight." Rick laughed, high and brittle. "You think this changes anything? You think one glitch?" The man interrupted softly. "This isn't a glitch." He took a breath, then said, "It's an audit." Silence crashed down. Rick shook his head. "You're bluffing." The man looked at him almost kindly. "I never bluff." He turned toward Rachel. "And she wasn't supposed to see any of this," he added. Rick snapped, "Don't bring her into this." The man met his gaze. "You already did." Rick's shoulders slumped. The room no longer saw a manager. They saw a cornered man. A guest stood slowly. "So, he was stealing from us?" The bartender nodded. "Looks like it." Another guest scoffed. "And he lectured us about class." Rick shouted, "This is harassment." The man sighed. "No. This is accountability." Rick lunged forward suddenly. "Who are you?" The man answered at last. "Someone who hates bullies who thinks silence is consent." Rick's phone buzzed again. He glanced down, then froze. His knees nearly buckled. Rachel saw it, the exact moment he understood. Not just that he was exposed, but that it was permanent. Rick whispered, "You can't do this." The man replied softly, "You did it to yourself." Security stepped in fully now, taking Rick by the arm. "This is not over," Rick spat, eyes wild. "You hear me?" The man nodded. Oh, it's over. Rick was led away, his protests fading down the hall. The room exhaled. Guests stared at one another, embarrassed, stunned, silent. Some avoided Rachel's eyes. Others couldn't stop looking at her. She still hadn't spoken. The man turned toward her. And that was when everyone realized something. This wasn't about him. It never was. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The restaurant, once so loud with judgment and laughter, now felt painfully exposed. Plates sat untouched. Conversations had nowhere to hide. Rachel stood near the service station, her apron folded in her hands. She hadn't moved since Rick was taken away. Her heart still raced, but the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind something heavier, clarity. The man turned toward her, not with authority, not with expectation, but with patience. You don't have to say anything, he said gently. Rachel swallowed. She looked around the room. At the people who had laughed. The ones who had nodded along. The ones who had stayed silent when it was easiest. Then she spoke. I didn't help him because I thought he was important, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I helped him because he was human. Her words cut through the room more sharply than shouting ever could. A woman near the bar lowered her eyes. Rachel continued, gaining strength with each breath. All night, I carry plates for people who don't see me. That's fine. I'm used to it. She paused. But tonight I saw someone being erased in real time. And I knew what that felt like. The room leaned in. My father is sick, she said. Every shift I work here keeps him in treatment for one more week. I don't have room for mistakes. I don't have backup plans. Her voice wavered, just slightly, then steadied again. But I also don't have the luxury of pretending cruelty is normal. Silence pressed in. The man watched her carefully. He hadn't interrupted once. I knew helping him might cost me my job, Rachel said. And it did. She looked down at the apron in her hands. But walking past him would have cost me something I couldn't replace. A man at a nearby table cleared his throat. I didn't realize. Rachel nodded. Most people don't. She lifted her eyes again. That's kind of the point. The man stepped forward, just one pace. You didn't do it for me, he said softly. Rachel met his gaze. No, she replied. I did it for myself. A breath moved through the room. Not applause. Something quieter. Recognition. The man turned to the guests. You all witnessed a lot tonight, he said calmly. But the most important thing wasn't what happened to Rick. He gestured gently toward Rachel. It was what she chose to do when no one was watching. A woman spoke hesitantly. So, what happens now? The man looked back at Rachel before answering. That depends on her. Rachel blinked. On me. He nodded. You don't owe anyone here anything. She took a moment. Then said, I just want to go home. The man smiled. That's fair. He reached into his coat and removed a simple card, placing it on the counter. Not dramatically, not ceremoniously. This isn't a reward, he said. It's an invitation. If you want it. Rachel stared at the card but didn't touch it. What is it? She asked. A conversation, he replied. Later. On your terms. She considered this. Then nodded once. Okay. The man turned back to the room. This restaurant will be under new management by morning, he said evenly. Anyone who feels uncomfortable staying? I understand. Several guests stood quietly. Some murmured apologies as they passed Rachel. Others avoided her gaze entirely. She didn't chase either reaction. When the room finally emptied, Rachel stood alone with the man and the bartender. The bartender exhaled. I should have spoken up sooner. Rachel offered a small smile. It's hard. Until it isn't. The man turned toward the door. You passed the test, he said to her. Rachel frowned slightly. I didn't know there was one. There usually isn't, he replied. That's why it matters. He paused at the threshold. Take care of your father. Rachel's eyes widened. How did you? He smiled gently. I listen. Then he was gone. Rachel stood there, holding the card, heart pounding, not from fear this time, but from something new. But whatever came next, she knew one thing. It wasn't a reward. It was a responsibility. By the next morning, the story had already changed. Not the facts. Just the tone. The restaurant reopened quietly, without music, without ceremony. A temporary notice was posted at the entrance, "Management under review." Guests read it, nodded, and walked past like it was none of their business. But everyone felt it. Rachel arrived early, out of habit more than obligation. She wasn't sure why she came. Maybe closure. Maybe routine. Maybe she just needed to see the place one last time without Rick's voice filling the room. The bartender was already there. "You don't have to be here," he said gently. "I know," Rachel replied. "I just wanted to check." He nodded. "He's gone. Completely." She exhaled, slowly. Rick's office door stood open now. Drawers emptied. Papers boxed. The space looked smaller without his presence, like it had been inflated by fear more than authority. Later that morning, an unfamiliar woman entered. Sharp suit, calm eyes, no wasted movements. She introduced herself simply. "I'm overseeing operations for the time being." Rachel nodded. "I don't work here anymore." The woman tilted her head. "That depends." Rachel stiffened. "On what?" "On what you want," she said. "Not what you think you're owed." Rachel considered that. "I didn't help that man for a job," she said carefully. The woman smiled. "Good. Because no one's offering you one." Rachel blinked. Instead, the woman slid a folder across the counter. "This is an opportunity. It's earned. And it's optional." Rachel didn't open it right away. "What happens if I say no?" she asked. "Then nothing," the woman replied. "And that will be respected." That mattered. Rachel finally opened the folder. Inside were documents, training, placement, funding for continued education. Not charity. Not a favor. Structure. Merit. At the bottom of the page was a single line handwritten in neat ink. Character compounds. Rachel felt her throat tighten. Across town, Rick was having a very different morning. Banks didn't yell. Auditors didn't threaten. They simply asked questions that didn't stop. His accounts were frozen. His lease was under review. The restaurant wasn't his anymore, not really. It never had been. And no one returned his calls. His date from the night before blocked his number. The investors he'd bragged about sent formal notices. The silence was total. That was the consequence. Back at the restaurant, Rachel folded the documents carefully. "I need time," she said. The woman nodded. "Of course." Rachel hesitated. "And the man, from last night?" The woman smiled faintly. "He doesn't like thanks." Rachel nodded. That felt right. She stepped outside into the daylight. The storm was gone now. The city looked ordinary again. Cars passing, people rushing, life moving forward without applause. Rachel pulled out her phone and called the hospital. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'd like to ask about long-term options." She listened, then smiled for the first time in days. That evening, she returned home and cooked dinner for her father. Nothing fancy. Just soup. But familiar comfort. He watched her move around the kitchen. "Rough night?" he asked. She thought about it. Then shook her head. "Hard," she said. "But right." He nodded, satisfied with that answer. Later, when the apartment was quiet, Rachel placed the folder on the table beside the card the man had given her. 2 objects. No pressure. She realized then that nothing had been handed to her. No miracle. No rescue. Only doors opened where walls used to be. And that was enough. Because real justice doesn't shout. It just makes room for people who were never supposed to have any. Weeks passed. Not dramatically. Not with headlines or applause. Just quietly, the way real change usually happens. Rachel didn't rush into anything. She took the time she said she needed, and no one pressured her otherwise. That alone felt new. For the first time in years, decisions weren't shaped by urgency or fear. They were shaped by intention. She enrolled in the program outlined in the folder. Not because someone expected her to, but because it aligned with what she already was: capable, observant, disciplined. The work was demanding. Long hours. Precise standards. No shortcuts. She loved it. Some nights, exhaustion hit hard. Other nights, confidence did. Progress came in small, steady increments. Nothing flashy. Nothing performative. Just growth that held. The restaurant reopened under new management. Policies changed. Training improved. Respect became non-negotiable. The staff noticed immediately. Rick's name was never mentioned. He faded from relevance the way men like him always do. Loud at first, then absent, then forgotten. Consequences didn't destroy him. They simply removed the illusion he'd been living inside. Rachel returned once, weeks later, not as an employee, but as a guest. The lighting was warmer now. The energy calmer. The room no longer felt like a stage for egos. It felt like a place people could breathe. A young waitress approached her table, nervous but professional. "Can I start you with something to drink?" she asked. Rachel smiled. "Water's perfect." "Thank you." The waitress hesitated. "I just wanted to say, you're the reason things changed here." Rachel shook her head gently. "No. I was just the moment. You're the reason it stays changed." The girl nodded, visibly relieved. That mattered more than any recognition. Later that night, Rachel walked home alone. The city hummed around her, traffic lights blinking, footsteps echoing, life continuing in 1,000 directions at once. She thought about the man from that night. The one who spoke quietly. The one who didn't intervene with noise, only with clarity. She never saw him again. But she noticed his influence everywhere. In the way systems adjusted instead of collapsing. In the way dignity was restored without spectacle. In the way power moved silently, then stepped back. Months later, Rachel stood in front of a small group, presenting her final assessment. Her voice was steady. Her posture grounded. No trace of the girl who once apologized for existing. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone nodded. Then another. Approval didn't feel intoxicating anymore. That night, she visited her father's grave. "I'm okay," she said softly. "I didn't lose myself." The wind passed through the trees, gentle and unremarkable. She smiled. Because she finally understood something simple and unshakable. Real power doesn't humiliate. Real wealth doesn't announce itself. And real justice doesn't rescue, it reveals. Rachel walked away with her shoulders back, her steps unhurried, and her future unwritten, but firmly her own. And somewhere, far removed from her life now, a man who once believed himself untouchable learned the most expensive lesson of all. Not everyone you look down on is beneath you. Some are just waiting for the truth to catch up.